All right, so inflation is high. And if you're like me, you're wondering where you should put your precious resources, right? I mean, interest rates are rising, and finding things that are hard, real assets can be incredibly valuable. I've talked about it for a long time that I invest in precious metals. And today I have a guest talking about strategic metals, which are metals. He's going to get into all of exactly what that means. But basically, finding things kind of outside of the norm. These are opportunities that really have not been available to retail investors, and now they are available to retail investors. So really excited to have Louis O'Connor with Strategic Metals Invest. Louis, all the way from Ireland, how are you doing? Welcome.
Very well, thank you, Bronson. Hands across the Atlantic, handshake across the Atlantic, but I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, really excited to have you, and I think it's just I love talking about alternative assets, basically just meaning anything outside of Wall Street. I used to be an investment advisor, and now I call myself a recovering investment advisor because the longer you're in this game, you kind of see that Wall Street doesn't have your best interest in mind. It's all about fees and other things. So when we can do things that are creative, such as private placements, syndications, multifamily, even precious metals or rare metals, kind of what you're talking about, I think it's really, really important that investors get educated about this topic. So I'd love to just have you maybe start out. This is your forte. You've been doing this for over 20 years. Tell us a little bit about strategic metals. What are they? Why is the investment opportunity there? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, good question to start with, because strategic metals it's actually an umbrella term which covers rare earth metals, would be the scientific term for them, but most people probably would call them technology metals. Here in Europe now we call some of them green metals, which are the ones needed for electric car batteries, solar power, wind power. But the term strategic basically covers all of that. So they're, they have an intrinsic value in how we power and how we live our daily lives. They're in all modern technology, all these greener, sustainable energies, military applications, aviation. So just about everything really, you'll find rare earths and strategic metals.
Right. So there are some metals, I know, even gold, like I mentioned, I'm a big precious metals guy. Gold is used in a lot of industrial uses, such as conductors. It's a really great conductor, so they use it in cell phones, use other things. I know there's also minerals such as cobalt, which are used for I think it's like the vibrate function on your phone or other things, like they use it for certain conduction things. And these things that, especially in these days where supply chain has been disrupted due to COVID, due to shortages, due to other things, are there? I imagine there are probably some shortages happening in this area as well, which has kind of created an opportunity. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, you've sort of zeroed in on, the real sort of investment play in rare earths, Bronson, maybe without realizing it, but because supply and demand are in charge, but even more so than normal because China is the dominant market leader in rare earths. They produce more than 80%. It used to be that way. Many people will be surprised, or maybe not surprised, to hear in the 1980s, the US produced 60% of the world's rare earths. And for some reason, I don't know, I'm European and I wasn't, I was probably still in school, but for some reason back then between the government and private industry, they sort of allowed China to sort of take over. And obviously they were doing it for less money, maybe not as sustainably. But I think as well at the time, maybe nobody could foresee the massive demand coming, in technology and stuff. But the real story, like from this particular conversation about sort of, investors that want to learn about, is there a play here? The fact is that China dominates the market and the rest of the world pretty much waits in line for what China will release after they've satisfied their own quotas, their own domestic quotas come first. And that's why they've been very profitable to own for the last 10 or 12 years.
Right. No, it's interesting to watch because this is happening. If people are paying attention, it's happening with China, has to do with all resource-based anything, right? Particularly energy. It's happening with oil. They're making deals all over the world. They'll like build infrastructure in Africa and South America so they can have access to oil and other sorts of energy. I think they're building 4 times as many coal plants as they've had before. So as green as we're trying to become in the West, they're really just trying to expand. And it also is in terms of these rare earth metals that are really necessary. You can't, we look at a cell phone and we just think like, oh, it's just metal and plastic, but there's so much that goes into it. Like, I mean, this is just maybe don't have this answer, but a device like this, like how many different rare metals are there in there? What are some of the rare metals that are like in an iPhone or in a cell phone?
You're talking my favorite subject now, Bronson. Well done.
I saw you smile there. I was like, oh, I hit something good there. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, you because of it, you couldn't swipe in your phone without indium, but there's 12, possibly depending on the model you have. There's either 12 or 13 rare earths in one iPhone.
Wow.
So, and then that's then take into consideration laptops and computers and TV screens. They're critical and sort of. I mean, you can imagine why, Apple are producing most of the products in China. That's where the raw materials are, China has 50% of the world's reserves anyway. But Funny enough, though, Bronson, despite the name, rare earths are not all that rare. There's plenty of them in the US. There's plenty of them in Turkey, Afghanistan. But where China has really, really gotten a generation ahead of the rest of the world is in the refining, the separation, because the reason they're called rare earths is you don't always find them in abundance. They're not all that rare, but they're rare in abundance. And when you do find them, they're always a byproduct of another raw material. So the separation process, the refining process, it's complicated and it's expensive, and that's sort of where China has really gotten ahead. They're about a generation ahead of the rest of the world. Wow. And something you touched on, I'll finish with this. At the beginning of your point there was you mentioned about China sort of galloping ahead in different areas. It's sort of hidden in plain sight. If you look at China's futures policy published, nearly 25 years ago, they clearly stated that by 2025, they would be domestically self-sufficient in 10 different technologies. That's plain as day for everybody to see. That's the goal they've been working towards. And we're about maybe 2 years away, maybe a bit longer from, in rare earths anyway, because they now have 87% of the refining, where the US, the West in general, Europe as well, Europe is in exactly the same position as the US. We'll be waiting in line for what China will dial out after they've satisfied their own domestic quotas.
So there's a lot of things I think for the listener, I just want to point out that are really important here. And I think it goes back to an investment thesis that I have that right now in monetary policy, because again, it's important, you don't just look at an asset such as real estate, or you look at even metals, or that you look at kind of the global, what's happening right now in the world. And there's a lot of different trends here, but one of the trends is debt. We have so much more debt than we've ever had, really, I think, in the world, history of the world, as a percentage to GDP. And what's going to happen eventually is that debt is going to slow down. We're seeing with rising interest rates, we're seeing that eventually, if the dollar starts having issues, there's other things that happen, and it can just create a lot of problems. But I think what's happening is we're realizing at the pump, we're realizing just when it comes to buying stuff on Amazon or other things, the cost of everything is going up. And when you have digital stuff such as Bitcoin and other things and other maybe virtual assets, I mean, there can be value to them, but I think that as we've seen Bitcoin go from 70,000, at least at the time it's recording, to about 20,000, is that people in times of panic or in times of challenge, people go to real hard assets. And that's why I invest substantially in precious metals, gold and silver, and I have other shows that talk about that. But I think there's a real play here because the way you described it is, and I can just see it from what you're talking about, right? Is that we have there's a shortage of these. There's not a shortage of the metals, but there's a shortage to access them in the U.S. because of policies here. Because I know there's a big place in California. I think there's one in Nevada as well where they do some of this rare earth mining. But it gets harder to access this because places like China actually have a way. They really have been going after it very intentionally because they realize that resources and energy are the way to stand. So if you can control resources and energy, you really have a lot more self-sufficiency. And I don't know why. I mean, actually, I know why. I think some of our politicians have no idea why how economics work and understand. And we have, our current administration in the U.S. is begging Saudi Arabia to try to pump more oil. And it's like, that's not really how it works. Or actually, there was a tweet that came out recently that was telling gas station owners that they had to lower their prices. They should lower their prices immediately because this was an emergency. And I'm like, that's not really how this works. You can't just tell people to lower their prices. So anyway, what you're talking about with strategic metals, it fits into that same play. Is that we know we need them. It's very difficult to substitute things in here. There might be small substitutions you can make, but still it's typically for other rare earth metals as well. So how does an investor, I know we were talking a little bit kind of in the green room before the call, or before this show, how does an investor actually start to take advantage of that? I mean, what are the ways that people can invest now that they used to not be able to invest?
Okay, good stuff. Yeah. So until 2010, private investors couldn't participate in owning rare earths, and look, it's the only, as we talk about the phones, like let's say indium in the phone, the only end buyer for indium is Apple or somebody, or they have other uses, but an industry buyer, right? So there's no point in you or me, Bronson, having $100,000 like we would gold, buried in the backyard, or in a safe downtown or in Singapore or wherever, because it's of no value to us. How are we going to liquidate it? So the key thing to this being a success is, and the reason it was previously unavailable is, we are, and I say this with 100% certainty, we're the only industry supplier in the world that offers this option to private investors. Now, it's very, very important that I highlight that we're an industry supplier, because if we weren't an industry supplier, if I was just a sales and marketing company that was able to buy the metals, it still wouldn't work, because the industry supplier has access, number one, to investment grade, high value assets, authenticated with chain of custody and analysis reports, purity levels. And then most importantly, at the end, they can liquidate the assets for the investor as well. So just to give you an idea, we have more than 30 years experience. We're based in Frankfurt in Germany. We've been an industry supplier for 30 years. That takes up about 85% of our business activities. Even though that's not connected to the investor side, it's very, very important that that's what we're doing most of the time. Otherwise, we couldn't invite investors in and safely see through this transaction. So about 12 years ago, we bought what was an air raid shelter, a bunker in World War II in Frankfurt, converted it to, it's two levels underground. It's now one above as well. Converted it to a bank level secure vault. It's got 2-meter reinforced walls and bank armed security, fully bonded, fully insured, a duty-free zone. And since 2010, we've been offering this to private investors, mostly in Europe. Now, it wasn't exclusive to Europe, but our marketing, if you will, until about 6 months ago, was focused mostly in Germany, Austria, Switzerland. All of our sales partners are in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, because there's about 100 million people there. That's a big enough market to begin with, So we've expanded our storage facility. Demand is, ever increasing. And so we're now sort of, that's why, I'm happy to be here with you today to do a bit more marketing, or a bit more, get the word out there in a more of an international way,
Yeah, no, that's great. So yeah, you guys are a supplier, and I think it's good to, understand. So I guess, let me ask this again, just from this is an educational show, obviously we're not pitching any sort of yours or anybody else's, but so how is it structured? Do you guys structure this like a private placement deal? Is it more like a fund, or how do you, like, people can get in and out, or is it more of like a 5-10 year hold? Like, how do you structure that?
Yeah, look, it's as you mentioned, you're a precious metals guy like myself. It's the exact same paradigm as owning gold or silver. In fact, we also offer precious metals in the storage facility and PGMs, the palladium group metals, but we focus on the strategic metals more for investors because they're more profitable. So yeah, a client basically purchases picks, they might want one metal, or they might say, I like modern technology, give me the 3 metals that are connected to iPhones, or more people now are moving a bit towards greener energy, so electric electric cars and stuff. So so you basically buy the metals, you own them. It's not it's not a share, or You physically own the metals like you would gold. And then you store them, obviously, we recommend, there's no set time, because once you've taken delivery, you own them. If you want to sell them a week later, they're your metals. You can do what you want. If you want to move them to another jurisdiction, you can also do that. So there's no time limit on holding, because you're the owner. But we do recommend a medium to long-term play. So we recommend 3 to 5 years, even 10 years. And then we also provide the liquidation, which is when you're ready to liquidate. We guarantee within 3 to 4 working days, we'll have them sold for you.
I've got you. So you guys are kind of a mix between, like in precious metals, we call you like a dealer, but you also have a vault. So you kind of are doing allocated storage of that in a particular, okay, that makes sense. So people can get in. That's kind of cool. So if somebody wants to say, hey, I really know there's more demand here, I can go for this. Now let's talk for a minute about green metals, because I've been told, obviously there's so much push now to go zero emissions and everything electric, which, I don't mean to get political, but electric or these green energies, it's very difficult, and it actually is there's a lot of waste that's produced, kind of creating a lot of the stuff, but they're sold as, and I like, green technology. I drive an electric car, like, there's things that like I like about it, but I do know that to get where they say we're going to go over the next 30 years, we don't have a lot of things. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have kind of the metal supply. And I've heard silver is a big part of that, as far as green technologies and solar and electric. And can you talk a little bit about what some of those green metals are and some of the supply constraints that you see kind of taking place when the West has said we're going to go 100% green by 2050?
Yeah, no, very poignant topic. So actually, funny enough, just what you said there, I don't know if you know, but it was just announced in the last month in Europe that by law, you cannot drive an internal combustion engine after 2035 in Europe.
Wow.
So gone. There will be no more European manufacturers unless maybe they're exporting them. So you're right. It is becoming a reality. And at the same time, as you said, the infrastructure is quite not there yet, The metals you're talking about are dysprosium, praseodymium, indium. You'll often find more than one or two of these metals in permanent magnets, say for electric cars, in wind turbines as well, because of their magnetic qualities. One of them can hold up to 1,300 times its own weight independently. It was recently used in neodymium in the new World Trade Center in the elevator. So, but what's interesting that's coming, Bronson, which is there's indium again is going to be used in this technology, which is we're very close to seeing, and actually this was patented from a college in the US, somewhere in the south in the US, is it won't be long before you won't have to charge like a Fitbit or a smartphone or a wearable medical device because of indium, because they can absorb and transform the energy just from your movement.
Amazing.
We're going to see the same thing. There's one German and one Dutch car company building now solar cars. So you'll have they're increasing the technology and the capability and the potency of solar. There's this new sort of 4-layer thin film photovoltaics, which basically means the roof of your car, the side of your building, that doesn't even have to be a window, will be absorbing light and sun as well. So there's new technologies coming as well, but as you said, I mean, the one key thing at the moment is the infrastructure is not there. But as you said as well, without getting political about it, doesn't matter whether we sort of agree with it or not, this transformation is happening. And this is why I went from being an investor in rare earths to becoming a sales partner, because I think from now till 2035, even 2050, it's going to take a long time for all this to be done,
Yeah. And like kind of what we're saying too, for inflation hedges, owning real assets is great. And of course, the more fiat is created, the more you own real stuff that is in demand. It's kind of a double positive, right? Because the more fiat's created, the more it causes real assets like these to be worth more. And over time, as there's more demand, because they've said, hey, in Europe and in the US, like we're limiting how much you're able to use regular combustion cars. It's just really interesting. So let's talk about a little bit about history in this. Obviously, as an investor, I look at, what is the potential upside here? I mean, have you seen some of these metals over the last 20 years? Have you seen, over a few years, you've seen some of these move up 5 or 10 times in price, and kind of like other commodities, they tend to, go down and go up, and there's a fair amount of fluctuation, so you can take advantage of some of those movements.
Excuse me. Yeah. And just to give you an example, let's say that the last 5 years, some are up 70% a year, some of the green ones in particular. Wow. However, I'll give you the average. There's 10 that we offer, if you'd invested, and we recommend you buy all 10 just to have a good portfolio to have diversification within your metals portfolio. They're on average up, to be exact, they're up 34.25% a year, every year for the last 5 years.
That's amazing.
Last year, some of them doubled in value. Coincidentally, at the same time, China doubled their production of electric cars last year. So they held on to more of those metals, and they doubled outside of China, So that dynamic is not going to change anytime soon. And you mentioned politicians earlier. You sort of zeroed right in on the fact that, an interesting point, for example, is specific to rare earths. In a very rare occurrence of agreement, both President Trump and President Biden both signed executive orders recognizing that North America needs to wean its dependence off China, right? Now, that sort of sounded like problem solved, right? And that's typically what a politician will do. I mean, they're not experts at all in rare earths. China has gotten a generation ahead, and it'll take a generation to solve this. Just to show you where the real story is, it's not in where the reserves are, it's in the refining. And it's a very sort of mathematical, scientific process. The particular sort of specialty is a metallurgist, is the term for somebody who would be involved in that separation. To give you an idea, China has been graduating about 200 metallurgists every week for the last 20, 30 years. North America's been graduating about 200 a year. So just to try and catch up on that level of expertise and competence in refining will take a long, long time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, and these are all things that, we talk about, things that are inflationary, right? So that's, being positioned. There's people that have made a lot of money over the last 5, 10 years, positioning themselves correctly, seeing kind of what's happening. And it's not going to, it doesn't appear to be that it's going to slow down. What is the risk of, obviously, commodity cycles tend to boom if we go into recession or even a severe recession? How does that bode for commodities such as these? Because they are commodities. Like, obviously things go crazy. The counter argument is, well, maybe things cool off a bit, and then there's some more buying opportunity. Like, what do you foresee over the next couple of years if we do go into a big recession?
Yeah. Well, look, the good thing is all of our metals have an intrinsic value. Gold and silver do have some sort of industrial uses, but for the most part, now I'm also a gold and silver guy, and I'm not saying, somebody should buy rare earths over gold, or one is better than the other, because I wouldn't challenge anybody's beliefs or opinion. But you could argue that if all the gold in the world disappeared tomorrow, not too much would really change. If all the rare earths disappeared, our cars wouldn't drive, our devices we're using here now wouldn't work, planes would fall out of the sky. Literally, the world would disintegrate. So the good news is they have an intrinsic value. And if you look closely at where they're critically needed and often irreplaceable, those particular industries are all demand is soaring for all modern technology is soaring, and even now recently with this situation in Russia, Ukraine, like Europe now realizes it needs to wean its dependence off China for rare earths, but off Russia for gas and oil. And that is going to spur further the production of wind farms and solar and electric cars. I would say the risk area is not that I mean, they haven't, and none of our sort of investors they have not gone down in value, in the time. They might stagnate a little bit, but the thing that could happen would be, we talk about indium, that you need indium to swipe your phone. Maybe somebody might come on with a better technology or a softer metal that can do that even better. And that might, all of a sudden the demand for indium could go down. That could happen. And then, of course, you might have, and you will, you mentioned California. There's one production facility at the moment in the US, it's Mountain Pass in California. They will ramp up production, but what they need to do is get refining. Believe it or not, the only rare earths that are produced in America are still sent to China to be refined.
Wow.
So that will change, but again, 5, 10, 15 years, it's going to take time. It's going to take education, technique. So I'd say the only risk might be that, one technology might come along that's better, and, one of the metals. Luckily, though, they're you'll find them in many different applications. They're not just usually in one device or one industry. You'll find them in, AV turbine engines, phones.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that, Lou, real quick. I was going to ask you about the chip shortage as well. I mean, in these chip shortages, is part of it the supply of rare earth that's causing that as well? Okay.
Correct. Yeah. They're critically needed in chips. Yeah, and 5G and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is amazing how connected everything is, and like that's so interesting that we mine stuff here in the U.S. that we send it to China to go have it refined, and they got to bring it back. And it's just every time you do this, it's obviously, I mean, from a theoretical, and I love economics, and yeah, it makes things cheaper or whatever, but we're getting to a place where we're seeing a lot more tension in the world and conflicts and authoritarianism and different things. And it's just, this can cause major supply disruption. And if that happens, as we've seen, prices of commodities or things such as chips or all, cars, everything starts to go up dramatically. So I think it is really important that investors pay attention to, all different developments and such as this. But I really appreciate you coming on today, Louis, and just kind of giving us a primer on this, because I think it's something that I've been aware of, and I've had friends that are talking about, trying to get involved in this space. And I love, discovering new spaces like this, because it's just stuff that retail investors usually don't hear about. But if people want to reach out or they're interested in what you do, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Sure. So our website is Strategic Metals Invest, or they could just email me directly, Louis, Louis, at strategicmetalsinvest.com. And I'll add one thing, Bronson. I'm not going to give a big plug or anything, but of course, I'm interested in clients and investors, but actually, I'm sort of more interested in strategic partners. So if anybody's listening who maybe is into metals already, we need, or we're looking for 1 or 2 sales partners in the US. We don't have any at the moment. We're all in Europe, so could be interesting for someone. There's no capital required. It's just somebody who has the social capital or the business capital we don't have, because we're Europe based.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It's obvious that you're very passionate about it. You spent a lot of years doing this, and you lived all around the world in different places. And so really commend you for your knowledge in this area. And thank you for bringing this to our community. But thanks for coming on. So for those listening, reach out to Louis. He's got a lot of information about this. I think he's got some resources on his website as well to help educate you. And also, like you mentioned, he's looking for a strategic partner, which one of the best ways to grow your wealth is to find partnerships that really make sense. So thanks again, Lou. We'll have to have you on again in the future. This was really great.
Thank you, Bronson.
All right, so you heard it. Rare earths are a way to invest that are somewhat contrary to, public opinion of maybe what you should be investing in, right? There's not a lot of people, I don't think I know a single person, maybe one person, and I'm pretty well connected, that says, oh, you should look at rare earths. But I mean, he was sharing just really high returns. Obviously, that doesn't mean it's going to return well in the future. But if you look at the trends, right, that's I think one thing I do when I look at investments is, what are the trends? When we do multifamily investing, we see that we're short, 2 to 7 million housing units in the US. So that's a trend I want to get behind, right? And people are retiring and they're moving to the South. So we're taking advantage of buying in Jacksonville. And if you want to reach out and be part of our group, you can reach out at Bronson Equity and hit the join button, and we'll start a relationship with you and share deals with you. But in this particular case, it's really, I think the biggest play is around the green energies, right? There's such a big push for the entire world to go green, particularly in the West, and there's not enough infrastructure. It's actually kind of surprising, but in the world, solar and wind only provide 3% of the world's energy. Just think about that for a second. We're going to go completely away from these other dirty energies, but right now in the world, it's only 3%. And these energy, solar technology has been around for something like 80 years or a very long time, and same with wind technology. So it's just something to really consider, that as we go forward with this, it's just going to make the demand for some of these things, where they are, they're not rare. They're just, you just don't go after them. They typically are a byproduct of something else, as Louis was saying. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, it's important that you educate yourself on things like this that may be outside of your main wheelhouse, because you never know, you might find something that's really great. I discovered investing in ATM machines. We have an ATM machine fund that we open. It's very high cash flow. It's for accredited investors. We open it 2 to 3 times a year, and it's been awesome. So I invested in it, and then now I bring investors to it. So if you're part of Investor Club, you'll hear about that. But again, getting things that are not just, hey, I love real estate, and I do love real estate, but I love what real estate does for me, right? I love that mailbox money, but I also like speculating and buying things that I can see that are ahead of a trend, so they can cause things to go up more. So thanks for taking the time to educate yourself. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next show of Mailbox Money.
You've been listening to the Mailbox Money Podcast. For more free resources, articles, and videos, go to bronsonequity.com. There you can download your copy of the special report, The Single Best Investment Strategy During and After a Pandemic. None of the information shared here is an offer to buy a specific investment, and this is for educational purposes only. Consult your financial, legal, and tax professionals and use your own common sense before making any investment decisions. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time for more Mailbox Money.